Okay, so I just have a question for everyone, for the 4 people that are here. Um, would you guys be comfortable with unmuting your mics because this class is going to be a little different? And rather than me, looking in the chat and you guys having to type out like paragraphs as your answers, I was just wondering if you guys are open to talking with your mics. That's cool. Okay, Angela said that's cool. So Catherine, I'm sorry if I say your name wrong, Nitya and Syra. Are you guys okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you guys. Because this is very heavily, so I'll go over like how this class is going to go later on. Oh, okay. So for our table of contents, so we have 6 main studies that we're going to read today. So the Stanford Prison Experiment, the Monster Study, Learned Helplessness, Bad Blood, Willowbrook, and Tony LaMadrid. So then just to go over everything about the ethics, right, and some of the rules is that in studies, they can only recruit volunteers. So people have to be willing to participate in the study. So researchers have to get informed consent, which means, the volunteers have to know what they're doing. They cannot be deceived into thinking they're doing something else. So yeah, basically just they're gonna have to tell the person what they're doing and what's happening. And again, like in pair with the consent, there has to be a minimum amount of deception, right? So in some studies, it is possible, to like have some like white lies for the purpose of your study, but you cannot completely like trick someone into doing something completely different. And they also have to induce a minimum amount of harm or stress because, these are people volunteering. They're giving us their time to participate in this. And it's like, you do not want to make them distressed of any sort or even cause like any type of trauma from this study onto them. So the next volunteers also can decide to discontinue at any time. If they're in the study and they're like, you know what, never mind, like I don't want to continue with this, they're completely allowed to do that. And by the end of the study, researchers must debrief with the volunteers at the end to explain to them what they're studying and what was going on. So these will be some of the points we'll have to remember. So yeah, as I said before, this is going to be discussion based and I'll need the participation of all of you. So this is how our class is going to work today. So first we're going to read the story of this study. And then we're gonna look throughout the story and then tell what of the ethics we saw that were followed. And then chat about the rules that were broken. And then we'll be able to discuss our opinions on the study itself at the end. So like just any type of comments that you'd like to make. Okay, so now we can begin and become like little researchers for the day. Okay, so first we have the Stanford Prison Experiment. So Philip Zimbardo was curious about why prisons are such violent places. Is it because of the character of their inhabitants, or is it due to the corrosive effect of the power structure of the prisons themselves? To find out, Zimbardo created a mock prison in the basement of the Stanford Psychology Department. He recruited clean-cut young men as volunteers, None had criminal records and all rated normal on psychological tests. He randomly assigned half of them to play the role of prisoners and the other half to play guards. His plan was that he would step back for 2 weeks and observe how these model citizens interacted with each other in their new roles. So basically what happened next became really important. So social conditions in the mock prison deteriorated with stunning rapidity. On the first night, the prison staged a revolt, and the guards, feeling threatened by the insubordination of the prisoners, cracked down hard. They began devising creative ways to discipline these prisoners, using methods such as random strip searches, curtailed bathroom privileges, verbal abuse, sleep deprivation, and the withholding of food. Under this pressure, prisoners began to crack. The first one left after only 36 hours, screaming that he felt like he was burning up inside. Within 6 days, 4 more prisoners had followed his lead. One of them had broken out in a full-body stress-related rash. It was clear that for everyone involved, the new rules had quickly become more than just a game. Even Zimbardo himself felt seduced by the corrosive psychology of the situation. He began entertaining paranoid fears that his prisoners were planning a breakout, and he tried to contact the real police for help. Luckily, at this point, Zimbardo realized that things have gone too far. Only 6 days has passed, but already the happy college kids who had begun the experiment had transformed into sullen prisoners and sadistic guards. Zimbardo called a meeting the next morning and told everyone they could go home. The remaining prisoners were relieved, but tellingly, the guards were upset. They had been quite enjoying their newfound power and had no desire to give it up. Okay, so I'm just going to take a peek. Yeah, that's the end. Okay, so now for the first step. So what are some of the rules or some of the ethics kind of like laws that we saw were followed by Zimbardo?
He only used volunteers.
Volunteers. So yep, that's good. Yep, he only got these college students that were volunteers.
There were also volunteers that discontinued.
Discontinued. Yep, that's totally correct, right? It was on the other slide. Yep, so the first one left, and Zimbardo let him leave. He didn't force him to stay there. And then 4 more left, so yep, Zimbardo allowed them to leave, even though, I mean, it was pretty distressful for them, so hopefully they would have left. So I can go back to the okay, so we said, yep, he got volunteers, and they discontinued. Is there any other ones he followed? Okay, well, maybe let's move on to, talking about the rules that he didn't follow. So I'll name the first one, right? So researchers should only induce a minimum amount of harm and stress, but I feel like in this experiment, Zimbardo gave the prisoners a lot of harm. It wasn't technically Zimbardo, but he gave the power to the guards, which is technically under his control. So I feel like the prisoners definitely underwent a lot of psychological stress because of their role as prisoners, and the guards too. I mean, it appears that they were stressed because of how the prisoners were acting. So overall, I think this was a very high intense situation. So
He also didn't debrief after the session.
Yeah. At the end of the article, it didn't really say anything about debriefing. It just kind of said how, like, I could go back. Yep, he basically just told him to go home, like, oh yeah, my experiment's over. That's all, like, I wanted to see. Yeah. So I think so did we have informed consent? Did it
Appear
not really? So Angela said that? Yeah, it doesn't appear that they had that consent. I mean, like, um, it, so like based on this, what the article had said, it just seems like he was recruiting college students and didn't necessarily tell them what exactly was happening. I mean, like if I were a college student, um, and Philip Zimbardo was trying to get me to be in their study, and it was just very general, I would be very confused. So if I go back, the last one would be a minimum amount of deception. So I feel like this also ties in with the informed consent. I mean, um, technically, I feel like that is gray area, but it doesn't appear to seem that Philip Zimbardo really told them a lot about the experiment and what exactly he was doing. So I think that's another rule he broke in. Okay, and how about just some opinions about this study?
I thought it was pretty cruel to put them through that.
Yeah, super cool. I mean, like I mean, he like took these perfectly fine college students, they were gonna like live a good life. And then they go through this really intense like model that could have potentially like ruin them psychologically because I mean like they're in a place that like looked like a prison, they were treated like prisoners. They kind of fell into like that mindset into like people they really weren't, which is why they started to like show those characteristics. And we can even see, right, that like some of them, um, like someone got a stress related rash, like, and someone was burning up inside. So like it seems like they really were, like as you guys probably know, like sometimes stress inflicts actual sickness because I've dealt with it before. I mean, like if I get super stressed for like a week, I'll like get a cold or something. Um, but yeah, I agree. Like I feel like this is very unnecessary. Um, I don't think he would have needed to have like a prison study about this. Like just create one with like regular people because I mean like so many people could have like ruined their lives through this. Okay, so here we have the monster study. So it was a 1939 experiment conducted in Daveport, Iowa, on a group of kids at an orphanage that came to be known as the monster study, and it wasn't conducted by a psychologist. Dr. Wendell Johnson was a speech pathologist who wanted to get to the bottom of the underlying cause of stuttering. Johnson didn't subscribe to the prevailing belief that stuttering was an inborn and thus uncorrectable trait. But he still wanted to like investigate this. So he requisitioned 22 orphans and split them into two groups, stutterers and non-stutterers. Not all of the kids, only half in the stuttering group, actually had stutters. The non-stutterers received praise for their normal speech patterns, while the stuttering group received negative enforcement. So negative enforcement means like they were being put down for how they were basically talking. So they were constantly put on edge with reminders to avoid stuttering. The kids who didn't have stutters in the stuttering group sure did by the time the experiment was concluded. 3 of the 5 kids who'd actually had stutters were worse than before. Having established that a negative focus on stuttering makes the condition worse, and having proven it's a developmental rather than innate trait, Johnson put his clipboard beneath his arm and drove off. In his defense, Johnson's work helped countless stutterers who became after the experiment. There was one slight problem, though. Despite efforts to reverse the process, the kids who developed stutterers couldn't shake them. So they had that going for them. No parents and a little lifelong struggle courtesy of Dr. Johnson. Okay, so let's begin, I guess we can just say, like, point out which ones are followed and which ones are broken.
He requisitioned the orphans, so they weren't really volunteers.
Yeah, that's so true, right? These are orphans, and they're also children, so they don't have families or parents necessarily account them for being like, oh yeah, like I'll put them in the study. Yeah, so he basically just did it without their permission, which is very wrong, especially given what happened in this study.
He caused them psychological stress.
Yep, a lot of psychological stress, right? With the speech patterns, with the negative reinforcement too. I mean, like, basically what happens is that like the child was stuttering, and they'll probably get like name calling or like really put down for even doing that, which, as we see, made the stuttering even worse. I think at the end, though, he didn't he didn't debrief with them, because it just says, after he got his results, he just drove off. He just, he was like, I did what I need to do, and he left. Yeah, so what do you guys think about this study?
I don't think it was necessary.
Yeah, because I mean, like, I feel like this was very, yeah, I don't know how else to put it besides unnecessary, but I think like there was really no reason for him to do this. I think this speech pathologist just wanted to do it for the sake of doing it. I mean, like he gave children stutters that they didn't originally have, which is very wrong because, like, first off, they put them down for even getting it in the first place. And like, it's just because he didn't believe what was said before within science, that stuttering was something you're born with and like you couldn't change. Yeah, I felt really, when I saw this, I felt really bad for those children, because especially because they're orphans, they have no one else, and they just happened to be like, it was just like a very bad situation, especially on his part as well. I mean, it's crazy to see. There's some worse ones later on, that I might skip to because we might run out of time. But it's really amazing to see how like these things were allowed back then. I mean, in like the 1900s. Okay, so this one I'm gonna skip for now. And I'll go to Bad Blood, and if we have time, we can go back, but if not, it'll be posted. So this is Bad Blood. So in the fall of 1932, the flyers began appearing around Macon County, Alabama, promising colored people special treatment for bad blood. Free blood tests, free treatment by county health department and government doctors, the black and white sign said. You may feel well and still have bad blood. Come and bring all your family. So hundreds of men, all black and many of them poor, signed up. Some of them thought they were being treated for rheumatism or bad stomachs, They were promised free meals, free physicals, and free burial insurance. What the spies never told them was that they would become part of the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in Negro male, a secret experiment conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service to study the progression of the deadly venereal disease without treatment. So the study recruited 600 Black men, of which 399 were diagnosed with syphilis and 201 were a control group without the disease. The researchers never obtained informed consent from the men and never told the men with syphilis that they were not being treated, but were simply being watched until they died and their bodies examined for ravages of the disease. Initially, when the study began, treatment for syphilis was not effective, often dangerous and fatal. But even after penicillin was discovered and used as a treatment for the disease, the men in the Tuskegee study were not offered the antibiotic. Although originally projected to last 6 months, the study extended to 40 years. Local physicians asked to assist with the study and not to treat men. The Centers for Disease Control reported in a timeline of the experiment. Decision was made to follow the men until death. Eunice Rivers, a local nurse, was recruited by doctors to serve as a recruiter and conduit between researchers and the men. Nurse Rivers, as she became known, kept records of the men and drove them to government doctors when they visited the community. She took them to doctor's appointments in a shiny station wagon with the government emblem on the front door, according to Bad Blood. On one occasion, she followed a man to a private doctor to make sure he did not receive treatment. In 1945, according to the CDC timeline, penicillin was accepted as a treatment of choice for syphilis. The U.S. Public Health Service created what they called rapid treatment centers to help affected men with syphilis, except the men in the Tuskegee study. In 1966, a Public Health Service investigator raised concerns about the study. Peter Buxton wrote to the director of the U.S. Division of Venereal Diseases about the ethics of the experiment, but the agency ignored Buxton's concerns. Buxton eventually leaked information about the study to an Associated Press reporter named Jean Heller, who years later called it one of the grossest violations of human rights I can imagine. On July 26, 1972, Heller's story appeared on the front page of the New York Times, revealing that men had deliberately been left untreated for 40 years. The study was finally brought to a halt, and the following year, a congressional subcommittee held hearings on the Tuskegee experiment. In 1973, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of men in the study by Gray, the civil rights lawyer who had represented Rosa Parks. Okay, so what do you guys think about this experiment? Oh, I have one more part. Sorry. I think that's it. Okay, yeah. A $10 million out-of-court settlement was reached in the case. The U.S. government promised to give lifetime medical benefits and burial services to all living participants, the CDC reported. In 1974, Congress passed the National Research Act, which aimed at preventing the exploitation of human subjects by researchers. On May 16, 1997, President Bill Clinton issued an apology to the 8 remaining survivors of the experiment. The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong, Clinton said. It was an outrage to our commitment to integrity and equality for all our citizens. To the survivors, to the wives and family members, the children and the grandchildren, I say what you know. No power on earth can give you back the lives lost, the pain suffered, the years of eternal torment and anguish. What was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in your eye and finally say on the behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry. Okay, now we can talk about what we thought about this experiment that was from the US government.
As the reading said, I believe it was a violation of human rights because they completely ignored the minimum amount of harm or stress, and the volunteers were put through extreme sickness and even death.
Yeah, it's so correct. I mean, like we saw, the last slide said, only 6 of them survived by the time they were able to get like that compensation, which obviously like there's nothing that could compensate for what they experienced. Um, and like they also went under incredible deception. They said, yeah, um, we're gonna give you this medical treatment, and they're poor. Of course, they're gonna like go for that because they have these people saying that like, yeah, like we're gonna help you guys and things like that, and give them meals and everything. And what they got in return was just a lifetime of sickness because of a disease that they just wanted to experiment with. Anyone else want to point out some of the ethics?
I can't believe that someone or people would actually think to do this in the first place. Because, like you said, with the deception, of course, people are going to sign up, but they don't even know what they're signing up for. So I just felt that, oh, that's so sad for them to find out, like, during the process that they're not even receiving what they wanted.
Yeah, and I mean, like, a lot of these studies were taken in the 1900s, and back then, like, even though these rules, like, they appear to us to be like common sense and like obvious for them, because simply, researchers, they just want to get the point, and the proof that they like need. They like there was not a law that told them they couldn't do this. But it's just even crazier to see how it's like the US Public Health Service. I mean, like they're supposed to be the ones protecting the people. But in this study, they did the complete opposite. I mean, and even I think this is very funny how this nurse, like she was so committed to the study that she followed this man to his private doctor just to ensure he didn't get treatment for the syphilis. Yeah, I feel like this is one of the the most like morally wrong studies I've ever read. Okay. Okay, so next will be Willowbrook. So little was known about hepatitis in the 1950s. So when a school for disabled children in New York had a hepatitis epidemic, the New York School of Medicine, led by Dr. Saul Krugman, decided to conduct studies involving the children. Much of what was done would be considered unethical today, but did the means justify the ends? So we'll take a closer look. So hepatitis is a term used to describe the inflammation of the liver. There are different causes, many of which are viral. The Willowbrook experiment resulted in the discovery of 2 of the viral strains, hepatitis A and hepatitis B. So hepatitis A is caused by ingesting food contaminated by feces or from close contact with an infected person. Hepatitis B transmission is primarily through sexual contact or exposure to infected blood, such as from the sharing of needles. So Willowbrook, located in Staten Island, housed children with mental disabilities. Hepatitis was a huge problem for students and staff at Willowbrook, with 30 to 50% of students becoming infected, although this percentage has been contested. Because of the high rates of infection, Dr. Krugman decided to involve the children at Willowbrook in his studies. Before the studies, it was thought that there were two types of viral hepatitis. There were some ideas on how each was transmitted, but however, the doctors were very limited on how to diagnose the disease. So these studies began in the 1950s and lasted for 15 years. Children aged 3 to 10 being housed at Willowbrook were the subjects of the study. Dr. Krugman noticed that the students who were infected with hepatitis recovered, but then appeared immune to future outbreaks of the disease. He decided to take antibodies from the blood of the infected children and use them to try to create immunity or protection from hepatitis. So antibodies are produced by the body in response to an infection, and they are part of the immune system response to get rid of diseases like hepatitis. So Dr. Krugman deducted that injecting uninfected students with antibodies would jumpstart their immune system, resulting in a milder case of hepatitis once they were exposed. In addition, the antibodies would protect the children from future outbreaks. So in the study, there were 700 students and they were split into two groups. So group one had students that were already housed at Willowbrook, and some of them were giving the protective antibodies and some were not. And group two involved students that were completely new to Willowbrook, and all of the students were given the protective antibodies. And some of the students in this group were intentionally infected with hepatitis, and some were not. So because some of the symptoms varied, Dr. Krugman learned that there are two forms of hepatitis, A and B. The students who had the protective antibodies and were purposely infected with hepatitis had mild symptoms compared to students who acquired hepatitis naturally and did not have the protective antibodies. This understanding paved the way for vaccinations for hepatitis A and B that are used today. Okay. So how about this study about children used who were mentally disabled, and they were used to learn about hepatitis?
There really wasn't any volunteering or consent because they're 3 to 10-year-olds.
Yep. I mean, I feel like no children can necessarily consent unless they were with a family. And I feel like they also cannot consent because they have mental disabilities. So even if technically, you know, this person did like try to explain to them, they would not know the full capacity of this experiment anyways. It's not that people with mental disabilities do not understand, but it's the fact that they're children. I mean, children would not understand like what they're getting themselves into. So
Yeah, and to add on, like they couldn't even leave or like had the choice to like not even participate in the experiment, like they were just randomly chosen.
yeah. I mean, that's just where they live. They were housed there in this school. So it's not like they didn't even know they could leave anyways. I mean, like they're children, they just think, oh yeah, maybe this is something that has to happen at their school. I mean, I feel like it's crazy to see like the extent to what people do just for research. I mean, very sad. And like I think it was very like outrageous how he felt the need to give some of the children hepatitis in the first place. I mean, I think that's just crazy. Okay. So I'm just gonna go over this last one. This one's fairly short, I believe. Yeah. So Tony LaMadrid was a man with schizophrenia who was a participant and patient in an experiment conducted by the University of California. So this experiment involved taking schizophrenic patients off of medications in order to gain information about the medication, its effect on the patients, on others, and on the way the brain works. So the experiment vaguely listed the potential negative side effects of the removal of the medication, saying that the patient's condition may improve, worsen, or remain unchanged, though the exact nature of a potential relapse was unspecified. The results were quite disastrous, and 90% of the patients experienced very severe relapses over the course of the study. As many patients presented to having to be on medication often lied about how the experiment was affecting them to doctors. And so experimenters never reinstated the medication, though did not delve slightly deeper into the lives of the victims to find out what truly was happening. Finally, after 6 years of the experiment, the patient, Tony LaMadrid, committed suicide by jumping off a building due to this experiment. So just to clarify, this sentence, right? patients basically, like after being taken off their medication, they like just kept it to themselves. You know, when they went to the doctor, they're like, no, I'm fine. So the experimenters were like, oh, if they're fine, well, I guess they don't need the medication then. So what's your take on this?
I thought it was like horrible because they have negative side effects, and even first in the first place, even taking them off of medication was dangerous itself.
Yeah, I mean, is there anyone else who wants to say something? Okay, so yeah, I completely agree. I mean, like, they have this medication in the first place. I mean, like, before they got the medication, there was something, like, they had that reason for getting, to take this. So to take them off of it, honestly, I think made no sense. Like, they didn't just get, like, mental illness is something that doesn't go away. It's mostly something that sticks with you for the rest of your life, especially schizophrenia. So I think it's very odd to see, like, the UCs, I feel, are a very respected institution. But this person died at the hands of the experiment because of what they did. And it's also like these patients who were in this study, they got their medication taken away. So for them, it would be even harder to like get it back in the first place. Probably for like many reasons, maybe fear including one of them. I mean, I feel like in like even in our society today, it's very difficult for people to receive help in the first place. So just seeing this, how people were taken away and they were like, they got the help that they really needed extracted from them. Like I cannot imagine how these people have felt and what they had to deal with from being off medication. Okay. But yeah, so thank you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. This was kind of going more into like some of the problems during the research side of healthcare. And maybe another day we can go into like the more deeply rooted problems and like directly in the medical field and like with like doctors and things like that. Yeah, hopefully this was something new and enjoyable. I personally like looking at studies a lot.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.